Thank you all for coming. Welcome to the June 18th, 2024 meeting of the 2229 Main Street Advisory Task Force. Welcome to members, associate members, and others in attendance. We have a pretty full agenda, but I think we can get through that pretty quickly. Let me start with approval of the minutes, and I think we've gotten some comments, Rich, from Carl.
I got Carl's, and I mean, I think we could approve them with Carl's amendments. I've already put them in the document.
I do have one, I don't know if it would be the same, and this is in the risk assessment results discussion. The paragraph that begins, the assessment assumes, and I'm sorry, I didn't let you know when you're, the second sentence says, it also assumes there will be no use of groundwater of the site and effective, I think it, and so is the negative applying to both of them? I think it just a little clarification there.
Okay,
That was the only thing I saw, and that's pretty minor.
move to approve the minutes with the comments of Mr. Seidman.
So go over those changes again, just for,
Yeah, I think there's a typo under the risk assessment bullet two. It ended with a U instead of
okay. Yeah,
and then let's see here. We go down to the next page.
Yeah, basically making clear that there had to be vapor barriers.
Right, under while vapor intrusion for volatile organic compounds from groundwater beneath the site could theoretically. That's it, so I just added a note about there would also be vapor barriers installed in any buildings that were built at the end of that sentence.
okay.
And that's part of the institutional controls. And then in the next one, I think I just said, since groundwater will not be used for drinking water. I just added that because, just to clarify, because earlier you're talking about volatile organic chemical exposure, and then you're saying it'll be none, so it just clarifies that sentence.
Then we had a typo, okay. So with those changes,
I'll second.
did I have a motion?
Sure, I'm sorry, I thought.
Did you make a
the
motion?
was from it.
Yeah, I move that we
Yeah.
accept the
Make a
minutes
motion.
with
I'll second it.
comments by Ms. Flood and Mr. Seidman.
A second. Roll call,
Aye.
Carrie Flood, Rich,
Aye.
David. Carl, Pam.
Aye.
And Paul, I, and minutes are approved unanimously. Thank you.
Because there were several minor changes, we'll get an update on this one. A new copy,
Rich will update it, send it to me, and I will then send it to.
Because it gets sent, or at least it gets posted.
or I can go to the post, either one, I'm just curious how it's gonna
I
happen.
mean, if I'm looking for minutes of old meetings, I'm going to what's on the website because that should reflect.
Yeah, so what usually happens if there are minor changes, Rich and I make them and we approve them, then I send that to the town for posting. So the improvements will be on the site shortly. Okay, we've had two meetings, public forum, June 4th, and we had the select board briefing yesterday. Just open up for discussion for any comments, things we observed, things we need to take forward.
One comment, I was misquoted in the bridge, and I think it was sort of understandable, it surprised me that the bridge would be so sloppy, but a quote from Dan Rockwell was described to me. And I immediately wrote to him and expressed my dismay.
Yeah.
And they immediately wrote back to me and assured me that there would be a visible correction in that misquote. So that's happening, and Rich, if you could put that in the minutes, just to make sure there was a misquote and it's been.
Yeah, it was, Ms. Rockwell's statement was attributed to Pam's Pam A was attributed to Pam B, correct?
Exactly.
I think there's another Pam A quote that was attributed to me. the one that talked about you could eat vegetables there, I never say anything about vegetables. I don't do that, not that's untrue, but that's not me. Yeah, I think that probably was you. I did not correct the bridge.
I didn't actually read the bridge.
Yeah. So I don't want to make a big deal of it. There was nothing untrue about what was said, and I didn't say it.
I do have a comment, not just a general, observation. I think we have to continue to work harder, I think, at curbing our enthusiasm as I say, I think that there still is a tendency for us to project a certainty or, that I think we really gotta be careful about that, because I think although we all may share the same views about levels of risk, if we are, say, too enthusiastic or emphatic about it, I think it can make some people think that we are pushing it. It's just a
Risk or acquisition?
risk.
Yeah, I think we're never gonna erase everybody's concerns about the risk. Yeah,
I think also we should not be asserting a risk-free situation,
Right, and
which is what we have been, and occasionally we sound like it's risk-free
But
and
we've never, yeah, we might sound like that, and I have been,
you've been
I've
very.
been called on being an advocate as well. My response to that, I was like at the forum, I was delivering positive news that we all agreed on. That I wasn't advocating any result, I was stating the facts. And when I said-
No, I'm just.
and I say, no, what I'm just saying, when we have a pathway to acquire, when the risk meet thresholds, and we think that's suitable. Where do we agreed on? I'm just stating what we agreed on, and it sounds like advocacy, it's only because it's kind of positive finding, so. But this is a fine line, I agree with you,
No, and I'm not criticizing you.
but others have, so.
Well, I did, I used to, I did the first meeting we had.
It's okay, it's not-
Doesn't
It's
matter.
not done yet.
I just think it's a caution that's work, because it could work to our disadvantage. It could work for those people who have legitimate skepticism about this site. That we just we're not overzealous.
No, but also I've been careful to tell all listeners, including the select board, that we haven't made any decisions, that we haven't made any
No,
recommendations.
I'm not.
And then the task force make recommendations, but no
Absolutely.
one individual's opinions speak for the task force.
Absolutely, I think you.
So I mean, it's a fine line. Carl,
Yeah, I just think from a process point of view, I felt we spoke too much at the meeting. I do think it would have been, there were a number of comments where I think we would have been better served by listening and acknowledging the comment. And say, yes, that's the thing important, we would need to take into consideration, and not necessarily responding with like a fact-based response, not that that was poor information, I just think people may feel you're not listening to them. If you quickly sort of counter what they're saying or give a response to it. I just thought there were a few places where we could have just listened and acknowledged a little more, and the dynamics might have been a little bit better.
it's tough, and I know at least two circumstances, at least one where I corrected a misperception. So somebody basically said that the town would have to monitor the site, right? It's on us, and I said, no, that's on EPA to monitor the site, which is in fact,
Right,
I think it's important for us to politely correct misinformation, whether it appears in print or it appears, so it doesn't kind of sit there on the records. I hear you, you gotta be careful about that, but, yeah.
Well, a crude way to put it, but one that I would still ascribe to is, we want to give the town confidence, we're worrying on their behalf.
right,
You know,
which is why we're employing the services of experts that know a lot more than we ever will about those kinds of details. And one of the things that keeps coming to my mind, but I kept my mouth shut that night, is we will know a lot more about this site than most of the residential property in town that has never been looked at in anything like that depth.
Yeah.
Literally or so subjectively.
Yeah, I think David made a really good point at the public hearing, that it bears on trust. I mean, at the end of the day, part of our mission is to engender trust. So how do we do that? Well, first of all, we are citizens of various backgrounds, looking at the facts. And I think we have to be very transparent and try to build trust. It's not gonna be a perfect system, especially on the risk side, but there'll always be people that will question any findings or any opinions. But, as I said last time, we can only do the best we can in using the information and not overstating.
I think, Carl, I mean, yes, but I think that even saying trust. It can come across as not listening sometimes. I think just got, we've got to build trust, and I think, I think. I would just continue my mantra of just, we've got to be really careful about this stuff, and I think that it's not. It's a site that creates legitimate unease, and that is something that we have an abiding problem with. I mean, as I've mentioned, I think in the past, that Love Canal, the archetypal site. In 2023, there was an New York Times article about stuff that's been bubbling up at Love Canal. And admittedly, it was in a place that people thought as officially was not supposed to be residential, but it was used for residences 45 years later. And there was just less care brought to, according to this article, to the oversight required to make sure the residences were built. So this is, I stand by my view that this is a very toxic Superfund site that is on the NPL, and we are doing a great job. We've got a catalog cleanup going on and all the things that we've said, but it is not, it does not engender, I think, trust for us to be pushing, overstating the safety of the place.
Yeah.
I just want.
It's for not correcting anybody, it was a toxic Superfund site. It's being cleaned up and will no longer be a toxic Superfund site. It'll be a site which will not be zero risk because there's no such a thing. And there'll be risks that can be quantified, but it's not. It is not, it was a toxic site. That's why there's the concern.
Emotionally toxic for many people, as the court said, and that's the second what Pam said. Whenever we speak about risk, health, and safety, we have to caution all our statements as saying, we're starting from your concern. We're starting from, this was messier and it's cleaner now, but we're starting from worry about the things that you worried about. And we're looking for the scientific answers and we'll bring them to you. But we're starting from and still have that level of caution and concern. So rather than just say where things stand, which are at the moment reassuring, as I'll show you later, we still have to couch it from that caution point of view. And that sharing people's worries can help with the trustworthiness.
Okay, but remember, at some point, we're gonna discuss recommendations and discuss what degree of caution we put in.
And even those can be framed that way.
We'll talk
We
about
have
that.
to, and be honest about it, but we have to, frankly, it isn't, it isn't.
We don't blindly say, never mind, it's done. Right?
Or that it's safe,
Well, we don't use that word, right?
Well,
Should it?
Any other reflections on the forum, Rich?
Well, basically a question is, I've drafted minutes with, a brief bullet on each comment and the person who made it and where relevant the response. I know when we did it last fall, there was concern about, are we saying too much? My thought was, it's a little bit like the regulatory record, that you want to have a record of the comments to show that you've at least thought about it. But at this point, it looks very much like the minutes from the November meeting.
Right, and I haven't distributed those.
Yeah, but the question is, do we want that? Do we want some modularized version of it? What do we want?
I would go for that version, with the advisory that people can watch the recording of the full forum.
the problem I've run into with that, when Raymond recognizes it, you gotta be really careful that you're quoting, you're reflecting, it's very easy to paraphrase unless you're looking, if you're reading from the record, that's fine. But sometimes people can object to just
Yeah.
paraphrase.
Yeah, on the other hand,
You're great.
Yes, it's you, which just objecting to what shows up in the Concord Bridge.
I'm sorry.
It's like you were objecting to what shows up in the Concord Bridge, it's not,
Well, I objected to this,
yes,
I was quoted to say, I did something, I didn't say something, I might not necessarily ever say. It was-
Right.
That was quite different.
there's a caveat like that in the November minutes, and I'll do that too. We have attempted to briefly summarize the comment here, but for the full flavor, and then the video.
David,
Yes, I was surprised and reassured at the technical expertise that came from the public to testify. I'm a health physicist. How many health physicists who study nuclear radiation risk show up at public meetings? I'm a toxicologist. There were several people with technical expertise who wanted their technical expertise to speak to the issue. That was reassuring to me because it suggests to me that within the public, not all of the public, there are people who are looking at it through more evidence-based lenses than just lenses alone. And that bodes well for whatever the evidence is, carrying weight as the select board finally decides what to do.
Yeah, it was very, it always impresses me, the expertise in town.
But those specific
Yeah,
ones,
yeah.
the guy who stands up and says, I used to be a health radiation officer who came to this, wow, awesome.
Exactly.
And there were a few other things, so that, I was pleased at that.
yeah, I think they're good, and the questions we got last night, I think were very good, I think the select board is starting to focus on what the report should look like, not what they recommend, what they want in there, you know. This question was stated about they don't want a specific reuse plan, but they'd like to keep it at the reuse scenario level.
Which is consistent with what we're planning, is that right?
Yeah, I actually brought up the question, we really hadn't discussed what we want to go more deeply in that. The more I hear from Gary and Rich and others, I think the opinion is, no, we don't want to do it. But I think we'll have to talk about that, because I think there's things about this site that if there's redevelopment, you can only do it at this site, and the conservation trail park, for example. Or maybe even the battery storage, because it's in that part of town, or maybe some other things
Or the bus stop.
that can be better, best be done at this site, better than MCI Concord or Peabody, but the town is gonna get into a planning process to fold this all together, and, you know, that's not our job to do that.
And she wasn't averse, I didn't hear her say, we don't want your general suggestions about what might work well there, just leave things open. Be flexible, and which I guess is our, I'm hearing is our intent anyway. So even with those recommendations, they're recommendations.
One thing about the bridge, so, I guess Erin Tiernan has written a couple of articles, there've been a couple of letters. I asked Celeste if she'd be open to a task force opinion, so yes, should be allowed when other chairs are allowed a 400-word opinion piece, which I'm going to draft. And we'll probably send it out to you for comments. I can't wait for the next meeting. I'd like it to be in the bridge if we are publishing that. And it'll just be sort of a paraphrasing our findings. I'm not gonna rebut anything, but I want, you know, the articles were good, but they were more about the site than the task force. And I want there to be some focus on the progress of the task force. You know, as if everybody was at our farm, everybody was up to date on what we were doing. So I want to update the,
Well, we have no findings, yeah,
Hmm?
we have no findings, really, do
we have to find, we don't have opinions or recommendations, let's find.
We have what we have
we?
reported.
Yeah,
Yeah.
reported.
The findings are sort of the results of our research, that's it. Yeah.
One other thing about the forum the other night, I was super impressed with the woman whose name I forgot, who said she binge watched all our hearings.
Yeah, that was good.
What? God bless you if you're out there.
Relative to the bridge, I don't have it in front of me, but Nancy James once again weighed in on insurance and cited as a specific case pertinent to the town, and I wonder if that's something that we or Chris Carmody might look into to flesh out the surrounding facts, see if indeed they're relevant to us. I think it requires some attention.
To explain, I think. In the past, there's been some concern, well, we can't get insurance. So that's not correct, and now I think maybe you can get insurance, but. But that doesn't cover us enough, and what, do you interpret the concern? with
But
the-
that's not where I'm going. Where I'm going is, as I recall, her contention was that the town suffered in the past because of a court ruling that was related to an EPA case, that then came back to be costly to the town. And I don't think we can just turn a deaf ear to it. I
That's
don't know,
our town or a town?
our town. That was her contention in the article.
I can't remember, I can't remember what her specific reference, was.
No, right, and it's not online, Chris, so we have to go get the hard copy and look at it, but it was,
What was the date?
it was last Friday.
Oh, I think.
So I think it just deserves.
Have you gone to the Concord Bridge website?
Yes, it's not there, I'm
It
telling you,
was there this weekend. Weird, it's
I
not.
can't pull it up now.
I'll just chime in. It is on there. It's on the opinion page. I looked it up while you were talking, just as a heads up if you want to reference it.
Oh,
I think it's worth looking into, but I'm, certainly not under to rebut any opinions that people have there.
yeah, I'm not asking for a rebuttal, I'm simply asking that we understand it, that's all I'm saying.
There is, however, in some of the coverage, I don't know whether to be concerned about it or not, there's misinformation. The issue about radioactivity at the site. It was in the Bridge article, it was in the letter, the opinion letter, as if, it's a radioactive site, and that's the issue. You talked about it at the forum, that's untrue, but it's still out there. The issue that beryllium is all over the site. It's not a contaminant concern, beryllium was used there or not. I think we leave that, wait for our report to kind of report on what's real, but there's misinformation out there that. Don't want to spread too far, that it becomes a concern of lots of people based on misinformation. I like people's concerns to be based on real information. So I don't know your thoughts on it.
My impression of the coverage has been, I'm pleased that it's getting as much as it's getting. There have been minor inaccuracies, nothing glaring that need correcting, in my opinion. And pleased with the relationship we have with the Bridge overall. And I think we should nurture it as a cooperative relationship mostly. Yes, she got a quote by me wrong. But around the edges kind of stuff, nothing glaring, nothing dramatic, nothing particularly harmful. A, and B, we're not defenders of the site. We don't want to sound like that. That's not us.
That's a point.
That is not us.
But we do want
Why-
to be defenders of the thoroughness.
We are
and activities
defenders
of our
of the
work.
task force looking into reuse and legal and everything. We do not correct the Bridge if we say that if they say something that's scientifically wrong about the risk at the site. I can call her and have a conversation offline and say, Aaron, that's not my understanding. You might want to look into this. But we, as the task force, can't be defenders of the site. That's dangerous. So whenever you draft what you draft, here's what the task force has done, period.
We're defenders of the facts.
Not the facts of the site per se. That's not my understanding of our charge.
Well, the facts-
Insofar as the facts inform our work.
Our understanding of the facts, yes.
Yeah.
The facts can be very subtle too, and you gotta be careful about, we have to be careful about wading into things that may have subtleties that we don't wanna get into.
It's a tone. It's
Yeah.
tone. That's really all. And I'm sure you'll do a draft fine and we'll,
You're gonna look at it.
yeah.
I think this conversation is a fine segue for where we can go tonight, which is how are we gonna get our work done? Because it strikes me that when we had the four respective work streams put their material together as one document, then we've got to do our cross-check and see that things align. And that's when the hardy debates will occur as to what we say,
Healthy
and how
debates.
we say it.
We are gonna get to that, to the heart of the meeting, but, I do want to turn to David right now, who, I guess would like to talk to us about, so the risk results, you know, how to,
So there was confusion after Lou's presentation with the numbers, and this is over one, this is two, and all of that. So I called them, and these several slides clarify all of that, and where my understanding in speaking with them is about the evidence on the risk based on their analysis so far. So if you want to pull them up, but the, I'll start with this. The risk is assessed. So we're starting with a risk that people perceive as scary, because it has a lot of scary general shadow with Superfund and uranium and the things that I mentioned at the forum. So what this risk assessment does is it goes past those general concerns into the real nitty-gritty risk assessment details, the science. And science is two things. Are you exposed to the thing, and how? Do you get it under your skin? Do you eat it or you ingest it? And how much, and how old are you, and all those sorts of things.
just have a bit, one, so I'm sure.
Yeah, so it was
I'm not sure.
And Kara, please correct me if I get any of this wrong, but we bounce these around amongst ourselves, and I bounce them past the Rue guys, and it's very general, so, but please.
I think
Yeah.
I'm sharing.
So there are two categories. They look at cancer risk separately. And they look at it with a bunch of details, but the thing that's really important for the town with its concern about cancer risk is how unbelievably conservative they are. They assume that the exposure to a resident living there is gonna come from all those places, including the holding base. It's gonna be walled off and sealed off and capped off. They've added that in, including the cooling pond, which is gonna be scooped out, including the bog, and not just the peat moss around the edges of the bog. So if you look at what they've included, it's next to impossible, given what is supposed to be done at this site, that anybody would be exposed to all of them. But they've assumed exposure from all of them. They're looking at a really worst case scenario. That's a basic conservative assumption that the town needs to understand. So basically with all
What
of
about
the,
cumulative risk as opposed to?
I'll get to that in a minute, cumulative and the
But that's-
additive. And the cumulative and the additive only comes in with the non-cancer side.
Yeah.
That's why I distinguished the two. Okay, so what they figured was in two categories for a couple of the areas, not specified on the slide, 1A and 1B specifically, and they include area 2, but that's the one over on the other side of the bog that's highly unlikely to be reused for residential. But in the 1A and 1B areas, they calculate that there can be an 8 in a million increase in cancer risk. So that moves the average American's lifetime cancer risk living on this site for 70 years from 0.33333, however many there were, to 0.333341. That's not no risk. It's pretty damn small. That's the fact. That's not good or bad. That's not safe or not. That's the evidence on cancer. There were two areas that had elevated more than 1 in a million. They were these two areas, and area 2 had a 9, not an 8 in a million increase.
And
And that's the scale, and that's assuming that somebody who lives there, digs below 10 feet, is, does all of these exposures that are highly unlikely, so super conservative.
The other thing that's super conservative is that we don't know the soils that are gonna be brought in.
There are other
Compared to- compared to
conservative.
10 feet. are
There's
likely-
more of that in the slides coming up.
Okay,
Pardon me.
so just the risk here is incremental over normal cancer risk.
Correct, the normal cancer risk for
But
all of us is
unrelated to the site.
correct.
All right,
The
okay.
normal average American cancer risk over a lifetime is 1 in 3. And by the way, and this is a really important thing that goes with the book that I have, that's the book that I have out. That's getting, not dying. Which, as it turns out, scary as cancer is now a humongous
Yeah, well, I wouldn't want to see, public, don't worry, it took me about getting.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Let's look
Ain't
at
dead yet.
Right, so now we go over to the non-cancer, and that's studied a different way. So what they're calculated by is, when the EPA did their first investigation of the site, and subsequently as they've been doing more, everything they find that's on a list of boogeymen anywhere, basically, there are several lists of known toxins, you know, the CDC and ATSDR, and a bunch of agencies have, these could be bad for you, and this much could be bad for you, and it's based on mouse studies and epidemiology and so forth. They've investigated, the EPA has, everyone. Next slide. Oops, sorry. So this is for non-cancer outcomes. And what they do then is they say, in the scientific literature, what could cause an effect? And then they compare that to what could people be exposed to on the site? And that becomes that ratio that they were talking about that we had minor confusion over, just switch slides. And it looks like this.
That's the hazard index.
That's the risk calculation. So your expected exposure, how, right? Air, water, all of those things, where, area 2, area 4, all of those exposures and how over this number that comes from the literature that says that X, something could happen. And you don't want the top number to be bigger than the bottom number.
So you want this to be less than one.
Correct. Precisely. And next slide tells us the answer to that. I'm sorry, the next slide, we don't even need that. There's the answer.
So, David, can I ask a question? This
Sure.
is by compound. So it's a series of numbers which hopefully are all less than one.
Correct.
Or is it an aggregate, you know, all organ
You
systems?
guys are awesome, you're all a slide or two ahead of me, but you've asked a really great question, and it's kind of what Paul was asking about additive before. So if I inhale something, you really care about the inhalation system, you don't really care about my digestion system. So what they did is, and I think it's the next slide, might be the next slide. Yeah, here it is. Okay, so some of the ratios are above 0. And if you add up all of the inhalation ones for the respiratory system, and they did, it might get to slightly higher than 1. But it's for all of them, so you're adding the denominator too. So what you really care about, because you know about this from science, is the individual substance threshold, the single ratio. So for presentation's sake, they added stuff together, because they're not going to list 230 chemicals to give us every ratio. They will in their final report. But they added all of them together, additive, not cumulative, additive. But within one organ, or one organ system, for all the immediate exposures, dirt, soil, water, whatever, and that's where some of them got represented lumped together as more than one. But that's a math artifact.
And that's, let me, you know, I'm trying to educate myself here.
That's it.
So if there's a level of, you know, 0.5 for substance X and 0.5 for substance Y, the fact is that some of the risk, you know, some of those risks overlap, basically. So they add them and they get a 1, but in fact, in the real world, it'll be less than 1.
For each.
But
Exactly. So, and the reason that matters is that scientifically they studied them as one-offs. There is no body of evidence. It's the synergy of this and this.
This is important.
and this.
This hazard risk is very.
That it's a slippery,
conservative.
this is linguistics within the risk assessment field that we don't have to get lost in, basically. They've studied what this inhalation of this amount of this will do to your lungs, but not what this and this and this and this can do. So they don't have those threshold numbers for those. So you can get 1.1 on the top, but you don't know what the threshold is underneath, and it's way bigger than just the one alone.
Can we move along with the other question?
I mean, I guess the question.
Clarification, whatever.
This question was raised to me, and they probably don't have the answer to this, is like, if I have an exposure level X from chemical A, does that change my organ sensitivity
Yeah.
to exposure to chemical B?
Suspected and they don't know.
Right, so.
Science doesn't
That's
know.
everything.
Correct.
might be a concern if they're.
And that's where the EPA is trying to do cumulative, what they call cumulative risk assessment, into which they're throwing stress and noise and environmental justice and a whole bunch of other stuff, and the short answer is they don't know.
Let me just keep it moving. Last
So,
question on the topic.
the way that EPA refers to this as a target organ. So for instance, if you have two things at the site that both affect the kidneys, then you have to add them up.
Right.
But you don't have to add up, like, the kidneys are affected by uranium and the lungs are affected by beryllium, the non-cancer. Those are two different organs. You wouldn't add those up because they're two different things that could happen.
And even when you add them up for a mathematical presentation and get more than one, you have to remember, as you just asked, Carl, the science can only tell us what the action threshold is for each one off. So what really still matters is the ratio, that one ratio, we don't want to get the one, and none of them do.
Do you know what the largest ratio of a single item was?
I don't know, but I think they said there were 0.4s, 0.5s, nothing that really got close to one. And there's another conservative thing that's really important to add. I think it's the next slide. Oh, next slide. We just talked about that. When these studies set that threshold level, so they test the mice, let's say it's mice, right? And X is a level that starts to show up some bad thing in the mice. They immediately divide that by 100 at least, usually 1,000, often 10,000. So the threshold number up there on the bottom is orders of magnitude below what you'd actually see and in fact get.
These are the built-in safety factors.
Super conservative.
The point
Maybe this
is,
is about food safety with all this stuff. It's built in
It also-
conservatism to that bottom number.
it also separates risk from harm. When you measure something that actually occurs, that's harm. When you back off with safety factors to have risk, so the difference between risk and harm.
So when you're thinking about those ratios, that bottom number, that critical bottom threshold number, and you ask, are we at 0.4 and would one be bad? One is 1/100th or 1/1000th of what would actually be bad.
Okay, let's finish this thing quickly and the other conservative elements.
There are other conservative elements that are built into the way Rue did its work. So they're looking at what exposure to soil will be, but we'll have 10 feet of clean soil. Right? They're looking at no exposure to groundwater, so they didn't count that ingestion. They also looked at what the exposure would be for residents, right? So there'd be various people on the site. There could be police at the site, there could be construction workers at the site, there could be lots of people. But residents are gonna be there the longest and the most. So that's the one they set it for, which is the most conservative. So that's what it's standing for. And that brings us to the, everything that they saw well within state and federal health and safety standards based on the risk assessment science.
That was great. No, thank you. I want to add just one in the, so Rue and EPA met. Well, that we had a meeting to review the data that Rue was using, and there will be one data correction on the parts of the cooling pond. Rue used the soil levels that were there, but they are going to be excavated. So I think Rue will be revising what they've done on that part to include basically clean levels rather than actual levels.
Which means the top level ratio number gets even lower,
So there will be some.
further from one.
Anyway, there's a lot of, I have something that I'm gonna distribute, put in the meeting packet on the conservatism, so if you ever asked about it. I'd like to close on the segment. One question, one comment.
My question is, I think for Rue, and maybe not necessarily tonight, if I heard either Rue or our summation of their work to date, their risk assessment to date, they said it's primarily at the present time based on the targets for the cleanup, not on the actuals at present.
Correct.
So that was not really flagged at the forum last week, but I think people are gonna come back to that and say, projections are lovely, what's real?
Well, it's worth noting, and it's also worth noting.
Let me finish.
I'm
please.
sorry.
So I think we've got to make abundantly clear how the cleanup process is moving from seeking target outcomes to outcomes.
And what the legal guarantees on those outcomes are, so we're not just trusting.
But, the data that Drew is using, there were areas of the site that haven't cleaned up. Or areas that will never be cleaned
Yeah,
up.
they've got some action.
There's actual
I know.
data, so it's a combination of actual data where there.
That's my
there's some
point.
cleanup going. So it's a bit of a hybrid.
Exactly, that's my point.
Yeah.
And people are gonna point to the data that isn't actuals and say, that's hypothetical, that's a wish. When are we gonna move to the actuals? So let's just track how the cleanup moves toward actuals, because if we are trying to tell the truth and at the same time provide confidence where it's warranted, that's gotta be part of it.
Yeah, did you
And,
last time
and,
through that?
and it's important, because I've had people ask Pam's question. How do we know they're gonna actually finish the cleanup like they're basing their assumptions on? So the qualification about what the legal requirements are to do so needs to be part of that message.
It's the Swaru.
So
Pam, last two comments, Pam here and then Kara online, then we're gonna move.
So I was under the impression that Ruse, that they had said that they're, to ask before that. They were using the basis for what the soil levels were for things. That if an area was supposed to be cleaned up to this level, they assumed that it was all cleaned up to exactly that level. And not that some areas of that, within that area, were not contaminated or not, or much lower than that area. And that actually is one of the things that's built in that makes those more conservative numbers.
And-
So I don't know quite how to say that, but
Well,
I think that's.
In their report and in our, however, we report on their report, I think those items seem to be in the conservative, what are the assumptions that were based, what data were in there? So just make it clear to your point, what's in there and what's not in there. Kara, do you have one comment on this?
Yep, so I was actually saying exactly what Pam said, which is the cleanup levels actually are pretty good by using the cleanup levels in the areas we have not yet addressed is a conservative assumption, because when we do the confirmation samples, we really need to be significantly below those cleanup levels, right? It's very rare that we're at the level, we're normally significantly below them. And the other just two comments along with that is that just, and this might have just been David, how you were speaking, but just so we are all clear, so the holding basin was not included in the risk assessment. That area was an area that was just kind of blocked out as having no accessibility. So the holding basin was not in the risk assessment. And soil below 10 feet, same thing, is considered not accessible. And so it's also not included in the risk assessment. What they assumed is any soil between 0 and 10 feet could be brought up to the surface, right? Because once those areas are cleared to be clean, you can kind of move that soil around as long as 10 feet of clean soil still remains.
So the areas that they flagged as potentially construction workers should know about it, because there's contamination, that's also below the 10-foot cutoff, right?
No, I don't think they did anything below 10 feet. Because anything below 10 feet would need to have a separate soil management plan associated with it and separate actions.
Okay, next topic. So there are a couple of things in your packet here. One is the initial report outline that I promised for a while. So I want some comments on that. A little bit today, but it's not final, so you have time to think about it. And then there's some initial criteria that I want to kind of go through that. But I'd like to discuss sort of the integration right now, and when we talk about integration for a while, there are two aspects of integration. One is, I want to highlight what gaps there are right now. We've done a lot of work, what additional information on the various work streams still in need of that we don't have, if any. I know the one that has come up and Gary flagged it was kind of zoning issues and zoning controls. That's something that I know that Rich and Gary are investigating and will bring forward in the report. There's another one that was flagged to me again by Megan today, and that's septic system. And I don't remember, Carl, when we took on ownership and estimating infrastructure costs, whether septic was in there or not.
I mean, it's not in there as a separate figure, but it is acknowledged as a cost. So like one of the comparables from the private development included septic costs. And I sort of added, said, when I talked about the infrastructure costs, I said, that there might be an additional million needed for a septic system, so it is anticipated as a cost, and it is included in the sort of ranges there. I mean, I don't know that you can get. I mean, it's a complicated issue, because what septic capacity do you need?
Exactly.
Right, we don't know that, but we know what the uses are. And then where, what are the soil, where are you gonna put the septic system, what are the soil conditions? And then how do you design the septic system, and then how do you cost it out? And so I don't think, we can realistically come up with a.
Right, but how do we reassure in our report, the select board, that's not an impediment for development, that.
Yeah.
And there's some email traffic on that where I think Melanie and the health asked a question, and
Yeah, I don't know.
Karen responded and the state
I
responded.
guess, you'd have to assume that there wasn't suitable soil anywhere on the site. And sizable enough, capacity. To put in a septic system, that part of believe on a site that large, but no one's tested the soils. From a septic system.
Can you, and with the Reeves group, can you take on the task of reviewing their correspondence and seeing
Sure.
if there's enough there that we can put on a report to say,
Yeah.
even though we don't know what the
Right.
details of development
Right.
are,
Yeah.
the septic.
I mean,
is not gonna be
there's obviously been a lot of testing of the soil,
Right.
there's a lot known about soil conditions. I don't know if there's an engineer who would be able to look at that and say, the soil conditions are such that you would certainly be able to look at. Design a suitable septic system there.
Yeah, it just, there was the back and forth between the state and Karen. I just want you guys to take a look at it to see if we know enough.
Okay. Let me
If
look.
we don't know enough, then we have.
Right.
Yeah.
But I do think that's one of our recommendations, I mean, it's gonna have, should be before the town acquires it, I think it does have to do more. Engineering and design work around the infrastructure.
Exactly, well,
Estimating what that.
well,
would
to
cost.
Mary's point, that we're not gonna specify an exact, there's a housing development or whatever, so we don't know how big that system needs to be at the capacity.
Right.
But I think the feasibility of putting in a septic system to meet any and all requirements, we need to be comfortable with that. If that's the case.
Yeah, I'm not, we'll see what we get, let me look at it and.
Yeah, I sent you the correspondence, see what,
Yeah,
see what,
yeah, and I
see if
could,
that's a gap or not.
right,
I don't know.
yeah, and maybe we could, see what the maximum is. What data they have on actual soil conditions for EPA.
Yeah, I think Karen's offered it, if we could specify something,
Right.
then Bruce could put it in his model. But I don't know if we can specify it to
Right.
do that, so, okay, you get the point. Any other gaps in our knowledge that we have to kind of run down? Before we figure out how to knit the pieces together, and what that means,
Yeah, I'm wondering whether we should push for a bit more information on the private sports facility, without venturing comment on it one way or the other. It was clear to me that they usually cut a deal with the town that they either get, that the town can get a discount or not pay for school teams, but then they have to get some subsidies, or we'll charge everybody and we can make it work. And that's the one thing I'm worried about, flagging that as an option in the scenarios, and I just wonder whether.
yeah, there are two organizations that I found, one is Ed Sports, and there's another one that has built field houses and indoor recreation locally here. The last time it came up, the question was, one of the scenarios has the town acquires a site, but then does ground leases for private use, and one of those private uses, possibly housing, and the only other one identifies possible recreation complex, and maybe other. So to fill in that blank, maybe we have to do a little bit.
You want me to just go back to Edge and see if I can get them to talk a bit more?
Yeah, and there's another organization that, I'll send you
Give me the
information. That they look around the property as well, and, again, whether this site or MCI Concord would be the better location, that's not for us to figure out, but that is one of the potential private revenue generating options here we have. I don't know if there are any besides housing and recreation, but, so possible gap there. Anything else, that you can think of?
We'll have legal gaps, but there are known unknowns that will remain known unknowns
Yeah.
until if and when the
Yeah,
town seeks negotiation with various parties.
yeah, there's, well, I don't know if I call those gaps, they're known unknowns.
Yeah, yeah.
And we're still waiting for a quote on the liability insurance. The
On the what?
environmental liability insurance, but
Yes.
that's too far. But presumably that will come in time for the report.
It's a quote, and what that coverage would be,
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Okay.
We're expecting a premium and then a sample of coverage, a copy of the policy. So that's in the works. And I'm talking to our insurance broker to get a time when that will be available.
and in discussions with the other towns, they all have acquired insurance for their property.
The ones that I talked to said it was not a problem, but I don't have, I could call this guy in Salem back, they've had several sites, I could call the person in Ashland back. I have active, call me whenever you want kind of invitations from them to ask them that specific question, like what's the policy and what does it cover and all those things, if that would be of help to you.
Great.
Okay,
The towns that I spoke to, and I don't know if we could even find the people that, you know, somebody tells me
Yeah, I
to
remember
talk to
you-
this person and tells me
yeah.
to talk to that person. But the answer about insurance was, it had more to do with what we were doing on the property and not what had been on the property prior to our acquisition.
Yeah, in general, I think those examples, I had some of the briefing package last night that we didn't get to, but having. And I excerpted some of the examples, I took some of my own from Maine, you know, sites, Superfront sites that had a senior center, et cetera. I think it's important as part of the communication that. With the select board of the public or, any stakeholder, that we're not the first town that's been through the development, or the first town that's has seeked insurance, or the first town that's residential. You know, and to have those examples in the report, so insurance is one case, you know. We're gonna get some kind of quote, but we also should say on the towns have been able to get that
and
insurance.
if I can augment how those towns did it, I'll get that information to you.
Yeah, okay,
Can I ask a question about the bringing everything together?
okay, that's the next thing, so those are the major gaps, I think.
No, I was asking a gap question.
Oh, you are, those.
Yeah, but it doesn't fall, I don't
Whatever.
know how it would fall into which group. But in our recommendation, which it sounds like it's gonna be, pursue, you know, negotiations and inquiries to see whether it's in the town's best interest. Let's say that's what it is.
That's one possible.
Let's say that's what it is. Will we have, you had a proposed timeline last night, and it's theoretical. Will we be able to say anything about how to trigger next steps? How the town or select board, whomever, can actually then, here's what to do next if you choose to go this path or that path. How concrete can we be about
That's a good question.
empowering them to next step?
I think we can lay out, if that's the recommendation, we can lay out a series of steps that we recommend, but the timeline on the steps is entirely dependent.
Up to them.
On them and on town council and
Yes.
on budgets and on other priorities, you know. I just don't know.
Knowing what they wanna do with the land, given all these other questions.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I think there may still be something at least worth asking, whether there are certain things like that, what's the order in which is there a progression in which those things ought to be
But as
considered?
Paul said, we can lay that out. I was more
Yeah,
asking a timing thing
If
and I
X is
realized.
true, then they'll even worry about Y and Z.
So in thinking about that, I'm gonna almost start with the end. Let's say the site can be developed starting in 2028. Okay, working backwards, what happens between now and 2028 to make that a reality, all the negotiations, all the planning and the. So I mean, for me, that's what I did in the timeline I had. I kind of worked backwards saying, if the decision is if our recommendation is to acquire. It's gonna be a conditional recommendation, right? Because there's lots of things that have to resolve yet. The known unknowns, the negotiations. And those are gonna take time. So, you know,
And it's not impossible that we would see the town decide to commence toward acquisition, but then in a strategic move, delay the actual, effort to initiate negotiations.
I should have thought better before answering my question. Timing is obviously not something that we can lay out.
The most important timing, and EPA and DOJ have told us, is they'd like some indication from the select board if there's an interest in proceeding. That starts the process of getting, of sitting down at the table and talking. That seems to me, I wouldn't wait 3 years for that to happen.
And you make a point, and I commend you for it, and it's probably worth pointing out in this part of the report that the sooner we do that, the sooner we can possibly have a foot in the table with what the bulldozers still do on the end of the site.
Well, Wendy Ravelli asked that question about site is not gonna be flat.
Right.
And so the answer was, maybe, I know that Bruce and DeMaxis are looking at roughly a flat middle area, but.
But the sooner the town gets engaged in, yes, we might be interested, the sooner that opportunity is
So
created.
that, I heard that was about a 2020, so that. I remember Bruce at one of the site visits saying, that final decision is like 2026 when the final grade.
Okay,
So,
cool.
that sticks in my head, whether that's. Continues to be accurate or not, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm curious, because one option the town might say is, yes, we want to acquire the site. Go forward with it, negotiate it, but defer acquisition beyond 2028.
Yeah.
To like 2032 or something, because, there may be other more pressing capital needs, or, the economic conditions in 2028 might make it undesirable, or, so. It just seems like that's something also for the town to think about is.
Yeah,
When, I don't know,
absolutely, it's kind of beyond our,
right,
things are going to happen.
Right.
MCI in Concord is going to loom big in taking planning resources. I don't know, this site may be overshadowed or not by that whole decision.
Also, they may discover more problems when they keep moving the dirt farther out.
Well, They can discover problems in MCI Concord.
Well, I know, but we're
as
talking
well,
about
so.
our site.
So,
And it could also be the decision to move forward with acquisition. Sets the stage for a later discussion on development options, types, schedule, and so forth. It doesn't necessarily, in my mind, need to be overlapping in time simultaneous. You reserve the option to do a multiple different kinds of things over decades, but you don't necessarily know exactly in which order, because we don't know what's going to happen 3 years from now, let alone what's going to happen with the prison at the end of June.
so let's talk about integration, but maybe a way, maybe integration and report outline are interwoven. When I put together the outline, first of all, I tried to make it a simple outline. And basically, you'll see it's project scope in the background, how we did our work, and then to have each piece discuss what issues are considered, the methodology, the finding, the results, and the uncertainties. We talked about, we have to include the uncertainties, whether that's a separate section or whether there are uncertainties in each piece. This was sort of a work stream related outline, only because those pieces lead to the recommendations at the end, which we're not ready to do anything. When I put this together, the real only definite integration piece was the integration of the risk and the reuse. Well, that's clear, but there are probably others as well.
well, I think the problem, the way I see the outline now, is that you are presenting an enormous amount of information. And then you're going directly to recommendations. So I think you're gonna need a section that kind of connect, for lack of a better word, transitions people from the key findings under all of these sections to what the actual foundation for the recommendations will be. I mean, that's kind of where I see a lot of the integration happening.
Yeah, and it's buried here, Carl, in this section, which we could probably pop it out there, how we're gonna make this decision, or what criteria we use to make this, there may be a whole separate section,
Yeah, but somehow, I don't know, we see, it just seems like, there needs to be almost like a summary of what all the other sections are suggesting or indicating before you get to that section. It's,
Well, think about it, I'm not sure what that summary would look like, over repeating the main highlights of the previous sections, maybe we need that. Maybe it's sort of, okay, here's.
I mean, maybe. Or maybe in those sections, there'll have to be information that feeds into the decision criteria. Or something, I don't know, I mean, we can see.
I'd like you all to think about this, we're not gonna finish it, this is sort of a draft, but. I looked at another outline, I think it was the town of Mansfield. One or the other, and they had a similar, was it Mansfield or was it? Walpole, it's Walpole. And they had a similar, kind of simple outline of how they went through and reported, and then we had this next steps, which is like. What are our recommendations for, here's our recommendation, what are we suggesting as next steps? I don't know if this is the best outline or it's missing something, but in terms of integration. What are the key points of integration?
What is your definition of integration? Well, I mean, what are you talking about? You're talking about where does release fit in with this? I mean.
Well, the obvious one is,
Do you define what it will mean to this in this room? What it means?
so for example, rightly or wrongly, I didn't have a separate section here on human health and risk and safety. Maybe I should, but human health and risk and safety is a defining characteristic of how we're gonna reuse the site and where we can and can't do things. I mean, do you think we should have? I mean, we had a whole separate discussion here on human health, risk and safety, and I don't want to bury that topic. So maybe that's a bad idea. But in terms of integration, Pam, that's one thing. The reuse folks have been waiting for the risk results. Now, it turns out that it's not terribly impactful. It doesn't really define the whole
One concern.
They were waiting for that. What else are we waiting for? What else is the legal stream waiting for from? I mean, the ownership and legal, there's a combination, because there are legal issues related to ownership. I'm not sure where we put those in the report. Right, the rights of ownership and the obligations and the regulations, those are all kind of legal things.
It almost seems like in some way, you think of the report, almost like a waterfall or something, there's a sequence of issues the town needs to be reassured about in order to feel comfortable proceeding, coming to a recommendation on this. And the first is there has to be a legal pathway to acquisition. We have to be able to ensure that we don't have liability. The second one is we have to be comfortable that there won't be undue risks to human health. And then after that, are there uses that meet the community's needs? And then after that, can we do it in a way where the cost and obligation, it's almost like that. You're moving through the criteria almost as you go through sections of it.
I think that's a good way of putting it. I think suggests that we should call out risk as a separate section and probably have it right after.
Because you don't ask if we use it, it's not helpful.
I think we almost have to. I think we need some carefully worded version of what David said or showed us tonight. Because I think we really have to walk people through why we're convinced that risk is not an impediment to use of the site.
So that's a clear modification of what I have here. That's why I highlighted it here, because I wasn't sure it was the right thing to do. If you had a comment.
Relative to integration, I think we could look at what we're doing on the legal side and know right already, Pam, that we are in touch on some ownership issues like town obligations. My preference, my recommendation would be we go ahead and put our piece together and then look at it next to the other work streams work to see then how to refine it, how to synthesize it. Because if we start to drop things out right now, and make the channels too narrow, we're gonna miss things. I'd rather be expansive in the beginning. And then pare it down as we bring the different reports together into one.
In terms of the waterfall, I like that sequence, the first legal thing that, you know. Can we part of the site, can we get liability protection, so the acquisition part of it, and then there's the ownership part of it. The ownership part of it doesn't seem to be a linchpin. You know, but I think the acquisition part of it is sort of the key, so that has to kind of come first, the acquisition.
I would agree,
But that doesn't mean it should be in a legal section with two subsections, you know, that's why you need to think logically how.
Could we talk about how I mean, Port and I have already started putting our thoughts together. And our expectation was that we would be drafting our section. And,
Yeah.
when I ran the Energy Future Task Force, we had different sections and we put together a massive report and people wrote their separate sections. And then we were able to sort of see where things stood and what had to be put. So I just want to confirm that your understanding is that each stream will write its section.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and so trying to, and I understand completely the idea of having consistency and a kind of framework for each piece, but I think, at least for us, I think it'd be much better for us to write what we have to write. And, you know, then have everyone take a look at it and then maybe we're cutting and pasting at some point of various.
Well, right where you have to write, for the purpose of having an outline is to have some agreement beforehand, structurally, what that section would look like and how similar, the report should structurally be similar, so I wouldn't want, you know.
This is, I think, what Carl said is you have to have a sort of a thought process that leads you to the recommendation. I think that you basically laid out in the interview you used to, it's a cascading waterfall. I mean, that's exactly right. Within that, there are certain pieces of work that need to be done. And
To answer your question, definitely the work stream, leaders of the authors, take a look at each piece and revise this if you think this doesn't fit to how you're writing it, then let me know, because it's a flow within each piece, you know, what issues you concern, how you went about it, what the findings, what the uncertainties, maybe that's not the best way of looking at it, but it seems logical, Carl.
I'm also thinking maybe the decision criteria come early in the report. As opposed to before, right? You might revisit them recommendations, but we say, yeah, these are the criteria that the committee decided have to be met for the town and we've tried to address.
Well, speaking of that, I mean, so that was the other little document here, so, you might be right, because these are really the issues and questions. These are, you know, you could look at it as a separate set of criteria, you can look at it, what are the issues considered in each one of them, and, you know, taking an example, if you can read these things, I'm sorry. I'll make this clear. Anyway. You know, the legal question, is the current site ownership known? Can the town seek and receive liability protections from Superfund Chemicals? Has the title search been done? Are all items and mortgages known? Does the task force believe that line liens and mortgages can be negotiated to the benefit of the town? Are there known mechanisms to discuss and negotiate outstanding lien, blah, blah, blah? Those are either correct decision criteria or their issues. I wanted to list them separately because I think as we get into making recommendations, independent of the report outline, I think we have to agree on what's the base of making recommendations and what's each group going to consider yay or nay or uncertain.
Yeah, I think there's maybe a section that's not here that doesn't flow with each of the work streams. But I think we need to have a short section at least that says, what if we don't want it? What would then happen? Well, it's cleaning up for housing. EPA could, and as in other contexts, you know, bargain with the private sector for owners' Superfund sites. We could control it through zoning, et cetera. In other words, it seems to me we've got to show people that we really did think through, okay, what happens if we don't buy it? So that people aren't saying all along they were assuming we were gonna buy it.
That is in our, it's gonna be in our work.
It will, okay.
Maybe elsewhere, but it's gonna be in our work.
Like, I would almost, and I realize that, you know, some of the work you've done does that. I just wonder whether it almost needs its own section just to show that we seriously considered it.
And I had a version of that question, which is, what if the state or federal government, what if the federal government retains it, transfers it to another department? And what if the state ends up requiring it? Because then our local government does not have, you know, yet of course they have to follow the law or change it. Which, but if it's us, we have the power of zoning over private owners, but we don't have that control with government agencies.
I think, I mean, you all read a lot of reports that I've written, whether they're expert reports or project reports, and you know, kind of starts out with the background, then it goes through the work, you know, just what was the information gathered, and then it's sort of there's conclusions at the end, which in this case are recommendations and what we found. So to your point about alternatives, I think we've got to go through the whole, you know, description of what we've found, and then at the end, you know, here are the recommendations, you know. Here's our recommendation, but there's an alternative. Look, we're not gonna equivocate in here, I hope. We're not gonna say we can't decide, it's up to you. We're gonna make a recommendation, then there's the alternative, either we say, no, you shouldn't acquire it, and then there are probably several alternatives to that, you know. We're not gonna acquire the site, but let's find a private owner that we can sit down and that becomes more complicated descriptions, but you know, so I think to your point, for me, the alternatives, if you don't acquire the site, come later on, after you figure out what our recommendation is.
Yeah, I
The information, the information to support that may come within the sections.
I respectfully disagree with that. That I really think you need to say, we've, you know, here's everything we did. And if you will, there are two overall options, one of which is don't buy it. Here's what would probably happen. The second is, or don't buy it and acquire it. And the second, to which we, at that point, give equal weight is what happens if we don't acquire it.
Yeah.
And that obviously has elements of risk and everything in it. And then we go to recommendations. My concern is if you do the recommendations and then, you know, say what happens if we don't acquire, that it looks like it tagged it.
Yeah, I agree. I think you need some analysis
Yeah,
that compares those two alternatives
Okay.
before you make the
So
recommendation.
you put in, after we present sort of what we've done, put the alternatives or the options would be a second
Yeah.
section.
Right.
And then we go to recommendations.
Also, I'm not, I don't know where I'm headed on this, I mean, and I'm not suggesting this is where I'm coming from, but I think, you decide where roughly is not entirely out of the question. These are all gonna be, there's no silver bullet in our analysis, and it may be that these are basically policy decisions over which we haven't got enough scope to make determinations.
Right.
As to budget, as to other priorities, as to tolerance of legal risk, as to tolerance of actual risk, that maybe one could come to the conclusion legitimately that the task force is saying upon examination, the nature of this decision might bring one to the conclusion that the policymakers in town have to organize this material and come up with an answer.
I really disagree with that. We spent 13 months, we've been looking at the site for a long time. We need to decide what a recommendation is, and there may be some options in there, but we can't, you know, we've been charged with the select board to make a recommendation, and we have to do that based on the information we have. And we have to state what the uncertainties are in doing that.
I'm just suggesting, I'm not saying, and
Yeah.
you know, I'd love to be there with you, I'm just saying, I don't think it's out of question that a question of this nature with the various pieces of it, which are essentially policy decisions in the end, there is no silver bullet in everything this, is something that.
I think
We're just making recommendations, we're not the policy makers.
Well, I think
The policy decision.
I think the policy comes later on, after they get this information and they have it all, then they make a decision whether they're gonna acquire
It
it.
informs policy.
That's the policy, but it comes later, it's not a decision right now.
I'm just.
We have to set the select board on a pathway that we can describe that answers all these questions so they can make that final decision. Unless we say, there's enough now we know about the site that we cannot in good faith recommend you proceed. There's too many large unknowns that will never be resolved, or too much we know that we can't afford the site, or we cannot get the liability protections, or we don't need the site, or whatever. I mean,
Yeah, I'm 90% with you, I'm just making, I think it is that kind of a decision though, and there are enough variables here that are pure policy decisions, and we can tee up that one might conclude that the best thing to do is to tell them this is what we got. Maybe we have kind of a strong proposal, but we acknowledge fully the scale, scope, that the vision that's needed that is beyond this one.
well, I mean, that's what I described to the select board and whatever, that if you're expecting a recommendation, but acquire the site or not, we're not gonna get there. If we propose to move forward, we're gonna say move to vote conditionally, based on what we know. These things have to fall into place for you. And at that point, the select would make a decision, but that's well beyond this task force. That's 2 years down the road. And that, at that point, will be a policy decision based on other options to spend their money.
Yeah.
But, so I think.
There might be other information gathering that's important.
Exactly.
To get the select board to a point where it's comfortable or appropriate to make that decision.
Town council may sit down and find that, choose be done. In talking with EPA and DOJ, they just don't know enough. We have to defer the decision. We have to find out other things, or we have to run after, the mortgages on our own, whatever.
So I was looking at these, basically you have three things here, legal, reuse, and ownership. And I was thinking that the legal are really two different things. There is the legal that is the liability, and whether we can get liability protection, and there is legal that's related to ownership. What it costs to buy it, what kind of deal we can cut. And I actually think that the liability and the human's health and risk and safety are functionally very similar things, that they should go up front. They should be the first thing addressed in here, because they are absolutely something
That's a waterfall that.
That's wonderful. That's exactly right.
Well, but in other words, start by talking about liability and human health and risk. For the second thing that you want to talk about, you want to talk about, can you own it? So ownership obligations and costs, and then the reuse issues, and the costs for ownership are different from the costs for potential reuse.
I'm not disagreeing that those are the upfront things, but you can't, in a report, I'm thinking in a report, you can't combine the legal aspect and health and risk, they're separate issues, they need to come up front. And you're right, the
No,
legal,
but I'm saying
Just like-
divide it into two sections within those three, health, purchase, reuse. Health cost reuse, as opposed to, so there's a legal
First
aspect.
piece is- the first piece is, can we seek liability? The risk doesn't matter if we can't get liability protections or we don't know enough about this, the legal part related to the acquisition. Has to come first, but then there's a second legal part related to ownership.
Yeah, that's kind of what we're thinking about.
Yeah, and that, for ease of outline, that probably should be in the same section under legal. Second piece is, as we talked about, we'll break out as human health risk. Because that is really important, and only then, with those two pieces in place, can we really discuss reuse and ownership. That kind of makes sense.
So I think reuse comes first because, unless you have a desired use for the site, what's the point of owning it?
There have been acquisitions by communities that just think it's better to put it in their pocket without an actual known reuse upfront. Salem acquired a number of sites not knowing, not having an answer to that question.
But they have the potential, there's some,
And they turned one, they wanted to sell one, ultimately they hoped to a developer and it's now a parking lot. It was on spec, in other words, rather than knowing.
why would you require something if you don't want to use it? I guess protect it.
But they didn't know-
Something else.
They didn't know the how of how to use it,
Right.
why. they-
Because if you own it, you control what happens
Right.
to it in
That's,
any
that's,
case.
that's exactly right, because there is a very, I mean, I think, it's really interesting to think about stewardship responsibility on the part of the town, and you have a site that is problematic. Or you wanna talk about it, it's problematic, and one could have no expected use in the near term, and you could say, as a matter of stewardship, essentially, almost the moral obligation of a municipality to the people around it, we're gonna take this one on, and as you said, Carrie, absolutely, that we are the ones who are in the best position to protect our citizenry and then perhaps use it in the future.
And preserve potential uses that may not yet have been identified.
Exactly, what you said over at the very beginning, Tasha, I remember you saying, we have to think about those things we don't even know yet.
And to Carl's point, to add to that, the EPA is interested in offloading it en masse, not in part. And the town wants to definitely preserve the conservation area. So maybe we acquire it, maybe we recommend looking into acquiring it en masse without having your answer, what we're gonna use it for 1A and 1B. But because of stewardship, as other communities have done,
Right, exactly.
it gives us the options down the road, but we don't have the, what we're gonna use it for answer yet.
Nor does the select board want it.
I think
Right.
Also,
I think that's a policy decision, that first you decide whether you want to proceed in acquisition. Then you decide whether to bank it, whether to open up the conservation and bank the rest, or develop the site. But I think we need to put the reuse options in there as we
Don't
have.
we need to
What actually happens is a policy decision.
Don't we need to recommend that based on our research, here's why we think these, you were saying, we have researched this to death a ton of ways. We're heading towards recommendation, which we yet have discussed. It's not just listing the options, it's recommending some of them as preferred, isn't it? Isn't that what we're,
The reuse options?
isn't that what we are trying to move toward? Not reuse options, no. Acquisition or not is our big question.
Yeah.
Right? And our big question, as I understand it, is to recommend move toward one path or the other. Not just to list the options for here's how you could, or.
And also, I think, you know,
Why?
I think you could have just a fundamental, no reuse at all. That, I think there is a stewardship, you can just say, we think we need to buy it, we need to be the ones who are in charge of this thing.
Well, I would say stewardship is the use in a way, I would discuss it within that section of reuse issues.
Often when the town or any buyer or acquirer considers a property, the intended use and the cost are the essential first factors. Neither of those are the essential first factors here. They are.
And, yeah,
You know,
yeah.
yes,
Risk and
no, yes and no.
There are other factors that are much more important. We don't have a price tag on this, but the assumption is that the town would not want to get in too deep with covering these liens. The assumption is the select board doesn't want to hear declarations about best reuse. They'll settle for some possibilities and they'll put that into the mix with all of their other decisions. So we're gonna have other criteria that lead us to the conclusion, I think.
Yeah, and I personally think that you could come to a conclusion that is basically on the issue of stewardship, on the issue of what is the nature of the site and what are the powers of the municipality and what are our responsibilities as a municipality. And you can stop right there.
The combination of that with the multiplicity of uses that our research, our investigation, our questioning has said could be accommodated on that site.
I'm perfectly happy with the reuse. I mean, one of the options is that, stewardship is the, at least temporary stewardship or permanent stewardship on the reuse. But in actuality, that may turn out to be the because the timeline may turn out to be the best, the eventuality for the next 10 years.
Mhm.
You know, because while everything else is being decided, and they can acquire the site for, with liability protections for kind of next to nothing financially, I don't know if that's true or not, but let's say there's zero cost, and then our town council can really negotiate zero cost, so we can get the leads negotiated. And it's all about the transaction costs. I was asked about that. What's it gonna cost? And I said, well, you have the legal transaction costs, but beyond that, we don't know. Could be zero, could be a lot. Let's say it's zero. It's a no-brainer that the town would take it and then, okay, can sit on it. And then decide Peabody, MCI Concord and everything else, and then when this is ready for reuse in 2028, then you make the decision what to do.
Yeah, and I also
So
think.
it's temporary stewardship or permanent.
Well, I also think there's something elegant about talking about municipal responsibility and that this site is not just a business opportunity for us. We are, you know, we control the site in so many ways that,
Yeah,
and it's problematic one, and that on that basis alone, we have perhaps.
there are a lot of needs, every department that,
That's
you've
very
got to talk to.
good.
Now, before MCI, MCI Concord has sort of diluted things a little bit because, maybe you can do everything over there, except except trails, and maybe except playing fields, so. I mean, that's changed the landscape a little bit on the reuse, energy. But I think, to your point, the only reason why the town would consider, I think, could require, two reasons. Stewardship, just take it out of, take it out of private ownership, or we really need the site for municipal uses. And maybe we can take part of it and generate some revenues from it. So those are, but there are needs.
I have a question about the outline stuff, is there a, should we have a section that's on timing? Or is that integrated into the various?
Well, there's next steps, there's a section of
Okay,
next steps.
so that's
time-
what
time
I'm
is
talking.
Certainly, yeah,
What might be motion, what might,
That's what I was asking earlier.
yeah, okay,
yeah, that's it, and you know, the timing depends on the
yeah,
recommendation.
sorry.
If the recommendation is not to acquire. Well, I'm not sure. No, the recommendation is to acquire, then there's a pathway and timing.
So I think there's a stewardship thing having to do with being the first owner. If you are the first owner, you get to shape the restoration plan. If you are the first owner, you get the first crack at liability, negotiating the liability term, the tool. And as a municipality, we can do better than that. As a municipality than a private owner would be to do potentially. And we get to negotiate the best terms cost for the liens being. So there is an advantage to functionally lowering the cost of that land by being the first owner. We're the second owner of it. If we want to buy part of it later on, it might cost a lot more because somebody had to put out $100 million to buy it.
That's some of the costs and benefits of the option.
Yeah,
But I think that first owner is that stewardship kind of thing. It's
So
making sure they have the best liability protection.
So I think, there are set criteria here, but you don't have time to go through. I'd like to take a look at two things. I know I didn't give you enough time. One is the outline. I hear you have some suggestions and revisions, and so please send them. We'll review
I'm sorry to do this to you, Paul,
Huh?
but I'm sorry to do this, but I have a question, a real question, that is actually based, it's a probably helpful. It's, what is the relationship of this to the 2021? Because I'm reading.
To the what?
The reuse report, which is extensive.
Oh.
So my specific question is, as on the legal stuff, some of that legal stuff, was that vetted by town council? Should we be lifting, you know, there's a lot in that, what's a good.
Yeah, no. I wrote the legal stuff, and it was
Oh, you
basically,
wrote something.
it was public information. I basically said, it's all this EPA
Oh, okay, so,
notes and documents. It wasn't anything from the town.
okay,
So
that's
it was,
important.
and I think most of that is still relevant, but it doesn't have any
Okay.
options in
So
there.
we wasn't carefully vetted by.
It did not talk about, I don't think about acquisition. It
Well,
wasn't very focused on the town doing it.
Okay,
It
so-
that was sort of all the options.
yeah, so but the basic question is, the 2021 reuse thing is a pretty extensive document, it's commendable, it's a good thing, and I mean, should we be referencing it, should we be, I mean, how does it relate to what we're
You
doing?
can reference it, you can plagiarized it.
No, but you're doing a freestanding, you're not, this is not, part two of something.
No,
Okay,
this is more granular. That was intended to just lay out the tone. To create the enthusiasm, you could really use this site for a lot of different things.
okay.
And here's some other towns, there's a whole appendix, there's other towns, there's an appendix in
No,
there.
there's a lot of.
But it basically laid out the master plan concept. And then we had various options, which were pretty granular. But,
But anyway, it's just, I don't know, it's just out there.
that master plan concept is really the kickoff for the reuse part of this, as was described in the briefing.
The master plan map is a little bit different from the room map. We should figure out how we're gonna refer to places that way, to be sure we're not confusing people by using different terminology back and forth.
Yeah, the master plan, they combined a couple of areas. I don't think it's terribly confusing, but
Okay.
we'll see. It remains to be seen, just like, remains to be seen, and discuss where the Brew report sits in. Is it an appendix to our report? It's gonna be a standalone report. What happens with the Brew report? And we should discuss that, because that's coming due in July. So it's gonna be submitted to the town, and then, that report needs context if it is released publicly, right? It needs context and explanation, which may be beyond what Ruth puts in there. So we'll have to, I want it to be helpful to our work and not necessarily
I've
detract.
spoken with them about how they word things, they want to default to their sciences in their full report. But I have suggested to Nancy and Ariel that, to the extent that their document will be a public document serving us and their client, but consumed by everybody, that an executive summary or something has to make it accessible.
That's what.
Oh, yeah.
Because you need an executive summary, that's.
Well, as we do, right, as I've suggested you in the note, but I have suggested that then, and that could be a continuing conversation.
An executive summary or some integration a little bit with the reuse part of this, because they did that work in service of the reuse activities.
That's right, all their work says,
So to present that
envisions that.
independent of the reuse discussion, I think is a little bit jarring. Let me bring this down. So we're still, the outline and the criteria for decision making are still up in the air. What I want to do in the next couple of meetings is start to discuss how we're going to make recommendations, to look at these criteria and say, is this the basis for making recommendations, and what the recommendations could be? And whether they're binary or the 12 different recommendations, or there's subsets of recommendations. We haven't talked about economic development agencies. Do they play a role here in any of the recommendations? I'm not sure. So we need to talk about not what the recommendations, but the possible recommendations are. So that when it gets down to actually vetting them and discussing them and ultimately voting on them, we know whether it's 2 or 6 or. So I want to kind of get to that over the next few meetings. I'm gonna get to the public in a second. Can we close on, you are, liaison.
I'm wondering if each branch really might have recommendations that they propose to the task force based on their work. As one way to
Oh, just throwing out the
begin
recommendations.
to develop a list of potential recommendations. We don't have to stick with them, but
From this perspective,
right,
X.
or, as to address unknowns discovered in our work.
I think that our recommendations are really subject to good brainstorming.
Hmm.
I mean, it's open because I don't, very early on, I think there was agreement, it may not be binary, yes or no. And if it's yes, it's conditional, but maybe it is yes, conditional or no, but maybe there are other. I just haven't thought, we need our best thinking in there.
There are parts of the charge that aren't directly covered, not speaking selfishly, about risk communication. That's in the charge, but is not covered in the work group. That would not fit in the cascade that we've been talking about. So another guide to our recommendations would be to go back to the charge and make sure we've covered the things they've asked us to do.
They've asked for risk communication.
They've asked for advice
Of-
on
of
something like
All
that.
of it, not risk communication to get information to this committee, which is what risk communication has been doing so far. But risk communication once they make a decision, so that's.
In connection probably with acquisition. Anyway, there's other stuff in it too. The charge would be a good guide to help us with the review, the brainstorming of recommendation. Thinking of it.
Okay.
You had nothing else to do tonight, huh?
My question and my comments have to do with. I mean, this committee's done a tremendous amount of work. I mean, the amount of, research, legal, testing, et cetera. And my reading of your work is there are a number of potential reuses, correct? I mean, it's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What I don't have an answer to is the cost of acquisition. I think I'm hearing, we don't know.
We don't know.
That's correct. Full negotiations.
So, excuse me. So I would find it hard to evaluate. Each of these potentials, we don't know what, you mentioned, that it's stewardship, but at what cost?
Exactly.
And, unfortunately or unfortunately, the town now has this big, prison project. And a lot is gonna come down to cost, between all of the different needs. So is there anything in the report that will indicate, is there any way that you can give an indication of cost?
Yeah, well, I think cost is gonna be an important factor, that's not gonna be a factor. It could be a stop. The answer is yes, we're going to lay out what we know about the acquisition costs. I mean, for example, we know that there's $150 million lead. If we thought that could be forgiven, recommendation is obvious. But we think that, just like, so we think that can be forgiven. Probably to zero, but there's gonna be a negotiation of what that means. So we're gonna leave it at that, because until Venus is not negotiated, we won't know exactly what that revenue sharing is. Last night I was asked about, the Citizens Bank loan, mortgage. On the books is 9.2 million. Worst case, we can't negotiate that, EPA won't help us. The mortgage is still active. But we don't know that to be the case, and town council thinks it's probably not that amount. So we're gonna have to have some opinion that is probably less than, it's not zero. So that's where we're gonna be, the things we know, we're gonna have to, or take our best information judgment to them. The cost of transaction, town council, that's gotta be in it, the cost of ownership is, Carl's taking it on only to the point of development of infrastructure. We're gonna do the best we can, that's why we talked about septic tonight, how much can we do there, we can approximate that. But we won't know what the cost of actual development would be, because and I think Carl is offered to do some revenue projections based on maybe.
For the housing space, is that done the revenue inspection?
Yeah, so maybe that'll be, but it's gonna be highly, the acquisition costs will be probably better known than development costs.
So, of course, another question along those lines is, what is the value of that acreage? In other words, if it was just any plot of land, how many acres it is? 40, 50 acres?
47, but a lot of it is that bog and you can't. do it.
But
Let's say 20 acres.
If you put it in the context of, if you found another 46 acres
right,
that was half developable and half, would be open space, what would you pay a private owner? And, there are issues that would be involved in this one that would not be involved in.
so maybe
this
it is a
other.
range.
But I think first you'd even have to find it.
Maybe you could put a range,
Well, here's where it really becomes important, because if our recommendation is to acquire, and if that mechanism is eminent domain, then there may be compensation due to the owner. Now, who's the owner? There may be compensation due to somebody. Mina hasn't totally taken that off the table. there's an opinion that the land isn't worth anything because it's the amount of liens and contamination on it, it's not, you know, it's just, but, or maybe full value, because if it's pristine land. So we'll have to take that on, Kathy, and I don't know
Thank you.
what that will be.
And I think the appropriate terminology is recommend to seek acquisition or recommend not to seek acquisition, the operative seek word, because to your point, everything's conditional. We don't know what's gonna happen until we get started, and town council has gone as far as town council can at this point.
On the cost side, again, if it was $150 million, we'd probably say, don't invest a dime on legal costs of negotiation, walk away, but it's not gonna be that. So I would say if our recommendation is conditional, then probably the select board's first step would be to engage town council and sit down to take some of this uncertainty of the acquisition costs and everything else out of the equation. We probably will know what the insurance costs will be, because we'll probably get a quote on the policy, so. The costs are gonna be, we're gonna estimate those as best we can. But it won't satisfy FinCom, because of the big uncertainties.
No.
It will never satisfy FinCom, because you want a capital budget, you want to know operating costs. And we can estimate those, but I wouldn't put that in any plan.
And in terms of development,
Well, and
what
you
would
don't
it
know,
cost there compared to somewhere
and
else?
we don't know what
if
4
we had
years
that.
from now it's gonna be. I mean, the
Exactly,
land's not gonna be ready.
exactly.
So
Yeah,
my understanding is that the committee was going to make a recommendation. And in the case of acquisition, it was going to be that not that we acquire it, that the town council begin the process of acquisition. And that these were a list of things that we would expect to be negotiated. And I assumed that then when town council comes back to the select board to actually discuss that, the FinCom could say, hey, we're not gonna spend $9 million for that.
Yeah.
Or they would say,
We don't.
gee, if it's only the cost of the lawyer and they've negotiated down all the liens and they literally did cost nothing to acquire it, then maybe you'll have a different opinion.
Look, by October 31st of this year, we're only gonna know so much. And it'll be a conditional recommendation, they'll lay out those conditions, and they'll be pretty, there'll be advice. There'll be advice to the select board, these are all the things you really gotta think about. And if all those come in place, then you have a nice acquisition, if they don't. There's someone who just walk away at that point, and so
Yeah, it's a-
ultimately, there may be a decision not to involve.
It's what, it is basically, so much of it is gonna devolve to them to decide based on all the variables that we lay out and all the policy decisions they need to make.
And so those policy decisions come later.
But also the results of the negotiation. You want to make your decision based on the outcome of the negotiations, not the input of the negotiation, because we don't know how much of those $159 million of liens are going to get forgiven or not.
Before we open up to other comments, and I want to adjourn the meeting. I have proposed the next series of meetings are Zoom meetings. Selfishly, because I'll probably be out of town during that, and come back into town our Zoom meetings. Are we gonna accomplish things by the Zoom meetings, do you think, should we try them and see if they work, or?
Do we need as many meetings? Do we need meetings at night? I mean, there are a lot of things that are. I don't know, just gotta make sure we know exactly why we're meeting, and you've been very good about that, but.
There, in July and August, there are 4 meetings, I think there are 3 in July and 1 in August. Instead of 2 a month, what beginning of July and then end of July, so I could spread that out. That's the schedule, we could do them at any times, but I thought 7 was convenient, we could do them earlier, we could do it at 5. Let me just ask,
Even 5 o'clock is hard for me.
are we getting thumbs up on the Zoom?
Well, I have a question about the Zooms.
Yeah,
I'm not averse to them at all, myself personally. But when we are at the point of raising our hands about what to recommend, the interpersonal dynamic of being in the room with one another changes things dramatically from Zoom. So what do you envision those July and August meetings accomplishing? does it lead up to a meeting in person where we would raise our hands? Or do we raise our hands at one of those meetings? And if so, then I wonder whether the social dynamic of a Zoom meeting might not be the less preferable to an in-person meeting for the big decision day.
So good question. Let me propose something. Let me propose that our first in-person meeting in September, we vote
Right?
on the recommendation that between now and then we kind of deliberate, we debate.
A preliminary
we
debate,
evaluate
yeah.
options. I don't think any of that gets in the way of writing. Because we're probably gonna write the same stuff, and it's just the recommendation and the part that. That we can write in September and October,
That'll work for me, but I'm just one voice, I think my sense, I don't know why I feel this, my gut, is being in a room with you all carries weight to me. And that key, how do you vote, which kind of all head towards generally anyway, is better first. So that
I
would
would
work.
agree, look, I think these are very productive in-person meetings and they're. It hurt me to propose Zoom meetings, but then again, they're more flexible, we can do different times and stuff. Court,
Well, it's absolutely.
I know,
Really.
get back to court.
I'm not opposed to Zoom meetings where they're necessary, but I want to bring us back to what we're gonna do over the summer. Specifically, do we want to, for example, set a timetable where each of the work streams gives a 50% draft and an 80% draft? I'm making this up, but something like that. And then the companion question is, how do we do that with open meeting law when this is draft work? That we don't want to march out of here with a life of its own, because we're trying to pull it together, these independent streams, and distill it in a way that tells one story for the task force. So I'd like to talk through how that's gonna happen. And when, so we do have
So I think,
some coordination between the work streams and the summer calendar.
I think that's correct, so we haven't converged on the outline. Let's up there next week and talk about report writing, the outline and how that's gonna happen, I'll make that a major topic along with. The criteria of decision making, those two pieces. And I think maybe the next two meetings we go through this. This question, when we wrote the reuse report, we had a lot of help from the town. Wink, wink, Chris Carmody, we had a lot of production costs, we had graphic support. We're gonna have to think about that come September. Whether we can get some help in doing that, because. You guys shouldn't have to worry about the formatting and even the font editing.
Yeah, I propose we use Arial font.
12 or 12.
Yeah, 12 or 11. I just think that the criteria are, should be. I would rather have us just not have a template that's given to, that's the kind of thing I think would be great to have, us have a discussion about, that we thought about it, we brainstorm together, what are the criteria here, why we think those are the right ones. This is a very long list. Many of them for legal, I think are gonna be maybe, but I do think that the criteria become a very, either they're inconsequential or they're very consequential, and I would like us to really have a kind of discussion and,
No, we should have it, so, look, there are two options, we start with the tabula rasa, let's just start from scratch and build it, or is there a straw man? I presented a straw man.
nothing wrong with this wrong. I think that it'd be good to just.
For me, it's. Straw man helps start the conversation,
Yeah.
it slows the out, I want to start the conversations, they don't end with any of it.
No, exactly, and I don't urge that, I think
Yeah.
that they're important things that we should spend time, really.
I agree, so the next meeting or two, I think the report writing, the criteria for decision making. And I
Unless
think,
we don't, forgive me, but it is possible you could not have criteria and have discussions and have a vote and work from that approach. I mean, I don't know that I agree with that, but
to the point earlier, also how we're making our decision with, a separate section on the analysis and having all the questions. It just helps to explain how we came to our conclusion. So lots to discuss.
I'm perfectly happy if it's Zoom, turning off my video and being still in bed and meetings with you in the morning.
Okay,
If
um,
I'm in town, I definitely prefer a live meeting, but
The other thing,
I don't think anybody's
the other thing is the people who are not here, I mean, it's, their voices here that
The public.
I want to, well, no, I mean, Kurt's not here, Gary's not here,
Yeah,
that's.
oh, you get to pull around, right? About
No,
time.
no, I'm just talking about just the summer and all of our absences and,
we're all moving targets, so I think Zoom is easier, and we'll see, but I agree, the real important stuff, like final deliberation, voting, and we should devote. I'd aim for the first meeting in September to bring it together and decide what our recommendations are. That's my thinking, but as the summer progresses, you can certainly change that.
When do you anticipate having a full first draft of the report done? If we have to have it finished by October.
I think the end of September, we should have a rough draft, so we have a month to review it and edit it and get our, I think the end of September.
do you see that it's just 2 meetings?
Where,
Or third, during that month of September?
I don't know, to actually schedule those meetings, I don't know, we may have to meet more often, I don't know, let's get the
I mean,
meeting,
if the discussion is really happening in meetings,
yeah.
and it's, the report is sounding more and more complex.
Well, right now, that would have us
Just wondering if-
2 meetings in September, 1 in October, and we submit the report, do we need more than 3? I don't know, I think there's on the schedule right now, we can always add.
Being a total novice at this. How, with all of these invested minds, do we jointly edit this document?
We don't.
We don't, no.
How does this happen? You draft it, we give some feedback here and there, but we're not gonna have like meetings where we wordsmith this bastard.
Someone has to be the editor, someone has to be the copy.
So, but how do we get our input in?
Yeah, I pictured like each work stream.
There's a difference between commenting and editing,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So we'll have, whatever date we have before draft, everyone will have to review.
Comment.
To make comments.
Okay, is that like an online submittal thing to the
Track
editor?
changes, I would imagine, right?
Hmm?
Track changes, I mean.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Yeah, and
I
then
think that's-
someone's gonna have to be the editor who will.
We may want
made
to,
a group discuss.
we may want to use the Google Docs, so you can actually make
Right.
changes in real time.
Right.
I envision the first crack at looking at it all, then it would be me. And then the final edit, we'd probably hopefully get an editor, a real editor to kind of look at. But to having the report structurally defined is the first step in editing, so we don't have
Right.
sections that just look different. You have the wording and passive voice and everything else, we'll worry about that.
So do you want to go ahead and get an outline together? Put that in the meeting packet for the next meeting, put it online whenever it's ready tomorrow. You can write an agenda for the next meeting,
Yeah.
the Zoom meeting, so that can be there. People can all send comments to you to start tracking, as long as they're not sending it to the whole group. And you can then put another version in there as well.
Oh, yeah,
Meeting
We have
packet.
that one.
I asked
You
that.
just said you were reviewing.
Well, I think we should all get all comments on the.
You gave me comments.
Back.
I'm gonna do some minor changes, send it back out to you, and then, but there's much more, I think much more behind the scenes that we discussed, so. By the next meeting. Which is whatever, we'll have the, what's our next one? July 2nd. We'll have sort of an outline that,
That we find.
so, yeah.
So did I hear that the criteria were gonna be before the questions that you were gonna ask, the yes or no questions, or whether it's, you can take it, are gonna be before the different work stream results?
we're getting an outline and we're gonna review those criteria for the next meeting to see whether those.
So you're not gonna start writing.
No, I can change those right now. You can add, you can edit those criteria as well, take some out, add some, so we have to discuss those two pieces. But I think, yes. So I think we're into the final stage here.
We haven't discussed the margins yet, grant margins. You wanna go home now?
Do we have pictures of ourselves and we're going to cover, what's the cover look like?
A giant question mark.
Right, for now, the Zoom meetings are gonna be at 7 p.m. Zoom meetings at 7 p.m. Do we want to
Okay.
change it or make that live?
Well, you get them early, morning would be nice once in a blue moon, but it's, we're not doing that too.
7 p.m. and change, I know you like 8. Okay, 7 p.m. Look, any comments from the public? Hey, Matt, I know, I wanna kind of talk to you offline about so Matt from Skio basically said, you need any help in integrating and putting this all together, and I said, listen up and wait till you hear the meeting and then we'll talk. So let's get to the conversation, see whether you have different thoughts, you can help, and you can feed that back to the group here. I don't wanna put you on the spot here now, so, because it's late also.
Absolutely. Thanks.
Okay, so I'll connect with you.
Thanks for being there.
Yeah, thanks for.
Yeah, thanks. Good work tonight. You got a lot done.
This is good. We're looking towards the end. Any other business, anything? 1, 2, 3, okay, meeting is adjourned. Thank you.